Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝗏𝗀𝗃. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, what do we got going on today? How you doing?
Well, it's sad and really insightful, I guess, this morning. We had last night, we've had a vendor. He's kind of, IRS probably call him an employee, but he's been a 1099 guy for the last 10, 12 years around GC when we were doing rehabs. And he got COVID a few months ago and it turned into pneumonia, and he actually passed away last night. And it's just a very sad day for us here at GC. And it kind of puts in perspective. We've been running around with a bunch of problems around here, or not really problems, just bigger things we have to solve. And it just kind of puts life in perspective about what we're here for. And we had Gary Davidson on a few episodes ago, and we talked about the whole giving mentality. And, at the end of the day, we're all probably here to make money, but at the end of the day, that is probably the least of everything. And the whole purpose and helping people and giving back, it leads to making money. But I don't know. It's just I'm having an insightful morning, I guess, here. So,
yeah, man, we're going deeper than usual here. I appreciate it. Yeah, so Gary Davidson episode 79, 80, somewhere in that range, I believe. But I love that. Like, wake up with the intention of, how do I provide value to others? Pick 5 people, right? And if you can provide value to them and be purposeful about it and not keep score, like, that will, don't worry about what it'll return to you, but it will return. I can tell you that. I can tell you that from experience. Like, the biggest thing in our business right now is the people we have involved, and it's the value we've provided that has elevated us from where we were a year ago, 2 years ago. So
no, there's just more to life than money, and the money will come if you do the right things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Like, when we're all said and done, what are people going to say about you? You die twice. You die physically, and then you die when everyone stops talking about you, right? And we all have a million things going on in our own life, and you focus on your own stuff. But man, like, this is your public service announcement to live with a purpose here.
Yeah,
so started nice and deep. Whew.
Yep.
Let's come back off. What's a housing provider tip of the week?
Oh, my housing provider tip just sounds very cold compared to what we just talked about, but and then no play on words, because I'm going to talk about HVAC cleaning in the fall coming up here. But we always look at our numbers here at GC, and looking at our HVAC, our furnace maintenance last year. We had a large percentage of properties that we brought on that, didn't go through the fall months, that were a majority of our work orders when it came to no heat calls or issues around the thermostat or bad thermostats. So, make sure, for us, we couldn't avoid some of that because we didn't manage the property last August, September when we started doing our cleaning checks. But just keep that in mind, that $100 or $150 you spend to get that cleaning check done for your furnace or get your boiler kind of tuned up, and it'll save you a lot of money and a lot of frustration on your tenant side on the back end. So make sure you're doing your maintenance on your HVAC system as we go into fall.
I like it. We got a good one today. This is definitely a different spin than we're used to.
Yeah, no, for sure. We have, we're going to talk about an area we haven't talked about, and we're going to talk about house hacking, almost from a very ground level, strategic, and maybe even some strategic breakdown standpoint here. So on today's episode, we have a house hacker that bought a 4-flat, and we're going to take him through the entire kind of process, his mindset of why he chose that neighborhood, and we're just going to kind of take it step by step here and really draw out some of this information that he can give us that will help all you house hackers that are looking to get started here. So, all right, we're excited. Without further ado, we want to introduce Joseph Pochinskas, very Chicago sounding name even. I love it. So welcome to the show. We're going to just dive right in here. So give us, we usually don't go too deep, but give us a little background. You're born and raised in Chicago, or give us a little kind of how you got into buying this property.
Yeah, so I'm from the southwest suburbs, Midlothian, Illinois. I went to school at the University of Kentucky. I majored in agricultural economics. I got a job in a meat cutting plant on the south side of Chicago, which brought me, close to Canaryville, close to Bridgeport, kind of fell in love with the area. It's kind of rough and gritty, but charming in a way. I did what every college kid was told to do, where I moved back at home, paid off my student loans, paid off my car. I got out of debt, and then I moved to Bridgeport. So I moved to an apartment in Bridgeport in November of 2019. And then 3 months later, COVID hits, and from there, I found out really quick that renting, I didn't want to rent anymore. I'm paying $2,000 a month in rent. And I also don't want to go live back at home anymore, and I'm also sitting in this beautiful apartment in the middle of COVID, basically just burning money. Everything's closed, and I'm trying to find a way to creatively get out of the rat race. So then I stumbled upon 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗵𝗵𝗵, listened to a couple of their episodes, and it kind of came clear to me that I wanted to get into real estate, and I wanted to get into house hacking, because I wasn't in a place where I wanted to buy my forever home, but I also didn't want to live at home. So it kind of provided the balance of being able to house hack, having a non-committal housing situation that was still an investment, where I didn't have to pay for any expenses, essentially.
Nice. So you're living in the area, the near southwest side. Was it Bridgeport was too expensive for you, or didn't want to put that type of money into a house hack? Why Canaryville, or what brought you neighborhood south there?
So very naively, I went on Zillow. I found my realtor, Susan Cochran. She's a great realtor in Bridgeport, at Canaryville, McKinley Park. And I'm like, look, Susan, I don't have a lot of money. But I want to get involved in Bridgeport. She's like, no worries. She's like, I'm from the area. I'm okay looking at houses, even if you're not going to, buy them, let's walk through them. They add value to me as a realtor. And that's one tip that I would probably give to some people. If you're just starting out, being open with a realtor, the first step is really walking through properties. Don't be afraid to go to a local realtor and be like, look, this is where I'm at. I want to start walking properties. And a lot of times they want to walk the same properties, if they specialize in the area. So we went through about 3 properties, and I soonly figured out that I wasn't going to buy in Bridgeport. We went through a gut rehab my very first one was a 2-flat, essentially a gut rehab for $350,000. I'm not handy, but you can tell that you could put $150,000 in the building. It was just too much for me. I went to another house, and it was a 2-flat, and it was kind of a turnkey property, $350,000, maybe $375,000. And I walked through that, and, she's like, so what do you think? I'm like, I like it. And, the most naive thing ever, you hear bigger pockets, low and no money down. She's like, so what's your idea on financing it? And this time I know nothing about the financing side. I'm like, oh, like, you can do it low, no money down, right? And she's like, no. Like, you need money. And that's when I first learned about closing costs, so I went so after that property, we looked at a couple more, but I essentially told her, I'm like, look, I need a few months to collect a little bit more money, get some more change in my pocket. So I at least had enough for closing costs, yada, yada. So that was my first kind of sense of knowing why Bridgeport wasn't going to work out. I walked through a couple buildings, and boom, it just was out of my budget.
So the couple of nuggets I kind of take away from listeners, kind of understanding your limits, understanding that a rehab that's going to be that size, you're just not going to be capable of taking it down, nor are you comfortable taking it down. Another one I took there is making sure that finance, you understand your financing options before you start looking at properties. Probably, if you could do it again, I imagine you would have went that route, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's where that's where my learning really started, is after figuring out, okay, financing. And then I just started getting every Bigger Pockets book, reading everything I can, learning financing options. And then I went back to the drawing board, and about 3 or 4 months later, I didn't stop looking at houses the whole time. That was the thing. While I'm learning about it, like, I'm still wanting to walk through properties. So once I guess how I found this property is, Bridgeport is just like every neighborhood in Chicago in the last year, the market's just been crazy. It's gone up by 15, 20%. Bridgeport, the numbers didn't work out in a house hacking situation there. But I did find this one property that was south. Canaryville is a neighborhood that's just south of Bridgeport. It's one I didn't really give a chance, but I never walked through it either. So there was just one property. It was a 4-unit. It was listed at $275,000. And when I went with my realtor to go look at the neighborhood, I was just pleasantly surprised. New construction all over the place, new rehabs all over the place. The neighborhood just seemed like that it was up and coming. And outside of that, it was one of the only buildings in the area that I could afford. I wanted to stay close to the south side just because my parents are on the southwest side. That's kind of where my roots are. That's where I'm comfortable with. And also it was a building that I could afford.
Gotcha. One other thing I just want to pull out there, you continue to look at properties. I think looking at properties on paper, walking the outside, or if you have a realtor that's willing to take you through, even if you're not prepared, then I think there's a huge ongoing experience education that you get from just looking at it. I remember when I got into this business to learn the commercial side, I literally just was on LoopNet all day long looking at properties, trying to understand how to back into the numbers, how they got numbers and all that stuff. It's just a huge way to really understand the big picture.
The biggest thing, just keep going. Right. It would have been so easy just to stop. Like you just keep every day, just keep going. It might take longer. You might be inefficient. You might make bad decisions, but just keep going. It'll work out.
Yeah.
And I did I built my own calculator on Excel. They have one on BiggerPockets, but I definitely recommend anybody that's just getting started, build your own calculator so you understand, what gross cash flow is compared to net cash flow. Taking what the roof's going to cost to repair in 15 years divided by your monthly payments and really understand what your budget is. That's something that I definitely recommend to a lot of people.
Well, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say we have our house hacking calculator on 𝗖𝗵𝗶𝗵𝗵investor.com. So you combine that with a CapEx breakdown. It's definitely a great tool for all you guys looking at house hack. So you find it. You had ultimately found this property. How long did it take you to between the time you kind of saw this 4-flat, realize this is in your budget to actually write an offer? And what was kind of going through your head in that time frame?
Okay, so I sent it to my real estate agent friend, 𝗬𝗲𝗃𝗵𝗁. He's now out in San Diego. And I'm like, what do you think of this property? And he's like, yeah, Joe, he's like, it looks like a cash cow. You need to get an offer on this tomorrow. So I call my realtor up. I'm like, okay, I want to put an offer on it. And she's like, all right, here's my lender that I use. I call the lender. I was planning to put 10% down on the property. I call the lender and quickly they're like, yeah, because of COVID, we stopped doing 10% down. You need, so I'm sitting there. I'm like, man, I'm just like, so I call like 3 more random mortgage lenders and they're all like, yep, we need at least 20% down. We got canceled due to COVID. So then my realtor's like, well, you can do an FHA 203K. And I'm like, okay, well, what's that? And she's like, well, that's where you can put 3.5% down. And I'm like, okay, great. Let's do that. I don't know what it is, but let's get an offer in. The asking price was $275,000. I offered $275,000. I didn't get the property. They had about 7 different offers. I was the first backup. Really bummed out. I remember it was about 10 to 14 days. And they still didn't accept. It didn't get contingent for a while. So I keep calling my realtor. I'm like, look, just touch base with their selling agent, let them know that I'm serious. What's the update here? And it ends up that the original people didn't close on the property because some of the tenants didn't let them in the property due to COVID. So then there's me, who I'm the second backup after about 14 days. They're like, you got your offer. I'm like, okay, this is sick. Like, I'm on cloud 9. We get to the property, we go check it out. I'm still running the numbers. my mortgage at 275, 3.5% down is around 1,900. Rents there, the gross rent is about 4,000. So I'm looking at all the units. They're rentable. They look pretty good. I'm no handyman, but you can tell they're rentable. And then there was one tenant that didn't let me in. And I counted that as a gut rehab. So all along, I'm just like, whatever they're doing in there, whatever, why they're not letting us in, that's okay. I'll get them out. It's going to be a gut rehab. It still works if one unit's a gut rehab. So we get to the property and we discover that it doesn't qualify for an FHA standard. So what your listeners should know about an FHA standard is that banks will not lend against distressed properties. They usually want to lend 80% on the house's value. The HUD created a program some time ago, an FHA program and it was designed for lower income people to get them into houses. And they said, look, we'll give you 96.5% of the money as long as the house is in great condition, So for houses that aren't in great condition, you can do an FHA 203K where you can put 3.5% down. And then they'll actually cover the cost of renovations to get it up to the FHA standard. So that's the route that we had to do just because the house wasn't in good enough shape for a traditional 203K.
What was it specifically? Were there any 2 or 3 type things that really knocked it out of being qualifying for the traditional one?
Yeah, there was. The gutters were half falling off. The plumbing was out of code and the plumbing and electrical was out of code in the crawl space. And then in Chicago, it was a 4 flat, but it was a 2 level, and they just redid the deck, and the deck had an overhang that got taken out. So the siding was missing on a big portion of the house.
Gotcha. What I don't know what your opinion is on this, Tom, but Joey, what was your thinking when the tenant wasn't allowing access? Did any red flags go up at that point?
Yeah, they definitely definitely red flags, but my whole thought process was, at this time, Mark, like all other in the direct neighborhood, there was 4 other 4 flats less than a block away that, 4 other 4 flats less than a block away that sold for over 500,000. So I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, I'm going to count it as gut rehab. Their lease ends in June. Even if they don't pay me another cent, as long as they move out by June, I'm going to come up on top. It's not like I'm going to be able to get anybody in there anyways, so they can stay. And my other thought process was, I'm buying a house in the middle of COVID in one of the hardest cities in the country to own a house. And my thought was, if I could get through this and if I could solve these problems, it's going to be a heck of an internship in my realtor career or real estate investment career.
Gotcha.
That's great. So we talk through any hiccups with the 203K process, because we know there's a lot of red tape. It provides a lot of flexibility in the fact that there's not a good amount of money to put down, but anything as going through the process that was like, crap, I would have done this differently.
Yeah. So truth be told, I'm not done with the process. So I'm actually starting renovations in 2 weeks. So to foreshadow what we're going to talk about, my tenants ended up squatting. It took me over 9 to 10 months to get them out. So I couldn't start renovations until they were out. But I will talk about up until what happened. So if you're looking at a building and you want to get a FHA 203K loan, what's going to happen is that your mortgage lender is going to work with the HUD inspector, which is a housing and urban development inspector. He's going to come out as a third-party inspector, and he's going to look at the house, and he is going to mark down everything that is not up to an FHA standard, which is a huge amount of information, So what he did is he came in and he audited the house, and he created a scope of repair. And now it's my job, before you have a certain time, once he inspects the house, it's pretty much like, all right, you have 14 days to get a bid with the 203K qualified inspector to come bid on the repairs, and it needs to fall within the budget that the consultant provides. So, and that's where some of the red tape is, where you can get to the point where your offer is contingently accepted. But if the inspector says, okay, this is going to cost $35,000 to get it up to an FHA standard, you get 3 contractors to come in and say, okay, this is going to cost $45,000, $50,000, and $55,000. Your deal essentially will die. And then I guess another notable thing as well is that when you are doing an FHA 203K or an FHA on a house hack, it does have to meet certain criteria if the rents will cover the mortgage plus expenses, 𝗑𝗏 plus a certain amount of expenses. So even if I'm in Bridgeport doing an FHA 203K, if the rents aren't going to cover a certain amount of the mortgage after, it might not work out, which is very possible. It happens all the time.
Yeah, and I believe it's 3. It does not account on 2 units, if I'm correct, right? It's 3 units and 4 units has the self-sufficiency test.
Yep, that's right.
So you end up closing. What month was it you closed in?
I closed in November.
November 2020, correct?
Yep, November 20.
So you closed. You're planning on moving it. Was there a unit empty for you to move in?
Yeah.
Is that
so I moved into the building. I'm in there for a few days. I'm with my tenants. Couple days into it. So I guess I closed in November and my lease doesn't end until January, right? So my first experience, and I guess my biggest takeaway from in real estate is if you're just getting started, get a mentor. Like, talk to somebody that knows more than you. Mike Baker, who with Second City Developers is mine. I'm going to bring him up a lot. You know, the amount of phone calls that I made to him, just being, you need somebody that you're going to be like, oh, you're going to want to call someone up and ask, what do I do now? So my first experience, I close on the house, and that weekend I'm sitting on my couch in my apartment. I haven't moved in yet. And my neighbor calls me and she's like, hey, the cops are at your apartment. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, the tenants upstairs and the tenants downstairs are having a brawl. And I'm like, oh, nice. So I call up Mike Baker and my mentor, and I'm like, hey, Mike, I'm like, what do I do? And he's like, put your feet up and relax. You know what I mean? He's like, there's nothing really you can do. And what I was thinking, I'm like, do I need to go down there? Do I need to get involved? You know, what do you do as a landlord? So my first weekend, 3 days into it, I get my first, hey, the police are at your place. And I'm like, oh, great. The tenant upstairs and the tenant downstairs, got into a brawl.
So I imagine you closed, you reached out to all the tenants, all excitedly introducing yourself. Like, how did those initial conversations go?
Yeah, so I had a pre-tenant meeting, or a meeting with all my tenants. I got on Microsoft Word. Nice introduction of myself. I also have to let them know, hey, I am going to be renovating the building. I'm happy if you stay. But I'm happy if you stay if, you follow AKA the rules, and the rules were simple. Pick up your dog poop, no smoke in the apartments, be courteous to your other tenants, really loose, really naive, to be honest. So I had my pre-tenant meetings, and one thing that I would not recommend from a FHA, if you're going to do a construction loan on a multifamily house, you're going to want the building empty. Okay. There's no, I don't see a and if or but situation where you're going to want to keep any tenants in there and try to do renovations around them. And if they are in there, like I did, you're not going to want to tell them that you have a renovation loan. One thing that I learned very early as a property manager is that you don't need to tell your tenants everything. Naively, I go in, I'm like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's my plans for the building. And my tenants, on the south side of Chicago, they're savvy enough. And a lot of times they know property management and real estate landlord laws more than you do, So by telling them all what my plans were for the building, they very early knew that I didn't have, they had me by the, what, they had me by the, what.
So was brawling on your list of rules for the building?
No.
Okay, no brawling.
It wasn't. It wasn't. So, and I did do my due diligence a little bit in terms of, before I bought the building, if you are taking over a normal multifamily building, you're going to want to get deposits. You're going to want to see proof of rent, proof of paying. I didn't take it far enough. I should have literally gotten like deposit slips, proof of deposits. The building owner told me, oh, everybody's paying. Oh, here's the rent roll on a piece of paper. Everybody's up to date. And once I got in, I found out really quickly that they weren't paying. So you definitely want to take an extra step and get proof of payment if you are taking over a multifamily building.
Yep. So a lot of great points there, Joe. So we have the brawl. You call Mike, say, okay, well, let's sit back and relax. What walk us through next? So that calms down. What's our next little hurdle that gets thrown at us?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I did not address it. I didn't address it. The next hurdle is I eventually move into the property. So January 1st comes around. I move all my things in there. I'm enthusiastic. I start painting my unit. My friend is helping me. I'm in there for a few days and my friends come out and they're like, hey, my car isn't there anymore, and I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, my car isn't in front of your house anymore. So I talked to all my tenants. I know one of my tenants had a security camera. I'm like, hey, can I have access to that? And she's like, no, but the neighbor across the street has a great security camera. She's like, you can go ask it for them. So I talked to the neighbor and I find out that the girl who sent me over there, her little brother stole my friend's car.
So you guys were inside the unit doing rehab work, and he went out to go to his car, and the car was gone. And ultimately, it was the tenant that their family member that carjacked it.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
What'd you do?
So what happens now? File a report. What?
So I find out, and I'm at the police station, and I look at, and this is a part of property management where it's relationship management, where he's like, look. He's like, you could do one or two things. He's like, you can go and try to get your car back, and not get the police involved, or you can get the police involved and, you could be in for 20 years of getting your house egged, paintballed, messed with, Fuller Park, Bridgeport. It's one of those communities where everybody knows each other. So a lot of, if there's an opportunity to solve an issue without police involvement, sometimes it's to your benefit. And in property management, I would probably, Mark, you might be able to comment, but that's something that maybe not just on the South Side, but everywhere it might be beneficial, is maybe the, law enforcement isn't your first go-to if something illegal might be happening in your apartment.
So that was the advice that the Chicago police gave you, right? Did I hear that right?
Yeah. And all so right. I'm like, look, I'll go up there, but I don't know these people, I don't know what they're about. I'm like, can a police at least come with me? I'm not trying to arrest them. I'm not, whatever. So we go up there and the police, didn't do a very good job in my opinion, but they did tell the tenant, they're like, look, if the car spontaneously shows up tomorrow, all this stuff, and we get a call the next day that it's in the middle of an alley, just sitting there. So we ended up getting the car back, and that it was upsetting, but it is, it is what it is. We ended up getting the car back, and it was almost like a silent apology from them. So they didn't know that it was my car. I highly doubt that they did.
So how about those conversations going on in that apartment? Like, man, you sold the landlord, the new owner's car.
Well, also, you live in the building. You see these people. Hey, how's it going?
Did you sleep there that night? Like you that happens. Like, did you sleep there that night? Did you have doubts about living in that building? Like, what was going through your mind at that point?
Yeah, so I definitely had definitely upset, upset as anybody would be. I stayed with my girlfriend at the time quite a bit after that. And the first part is it's also COVID where you can't evict people. Like evictions aren't going on. So you have to be strategic about how you're handling tenants during these times. Sometimes. So what I ended up doing is and to be fair, the guy that did it, he was about 16 years old. So I'm not happy about it, but I also am not in the business to throw anybody in jail. I don't want to ruin someone's future. I ended up going to the house, to them a few days later. And I'm just like, look, I know individually you guys didn't do it. And I'm like, but just stay out of my business. Like, just don't let that happen again. Don't do that, but it's COVID. And to be honest, there's not much you can do. And that's the worst part about it is and every 2 weeks you have the news playing, oh, no eviction, new extended eviction moratorium. So it was pretty like, what did I get myself into?
That's crazy.
Yeah. So you're probably talking to Mike Baker throughout all this, who great guy. Cash for keys come up. Like, did you guys start talking some of these alternate strategies?
Yeah. So I offered them cash for keys, but they were smart enough to know that they didn't, he told me I talked. So they moved, it's a 2-bed, 1-bath, and they moved over 9 family members in there. So I talked to the dad, and I'm just like, look, I could offer you X amount of money to leave, which was a generous amount. And he straight up told me, he's like, Joe, the realization is that we don't have where to go. And if I accept these cash for keys, he straight up told me, he's like, I know I could stay here longer and it'll be much more valuable than what you're offering me. So he basically said no. And he also told me, he's like, look, Joe, he's like, I've been evicted 3 or 4 times. He's like, I'm a professional at this.
Oh, geez.
And so I'm like, all right. At this point, it's a few months later. I start the eviction process. Mark, you gave me Halstead Law Group. Highly recommend them. So my lawyer's like, all right, this is what you need to do. You need to get all proof. You need to go down to the police station, get all police records. I go down to the police station, and between November and March, they had the police called on them 12 times. So it was just a lot. I had videos of stealing the car. So I guess, Mark, you could tell me, is there an eviction moratorium in Illinois right now still?
There is going on. So there's a whole bunch of stuff with the CDC and it being overruled by the Supreme Court and all that. But so by the time this airs, I don't want to put anything kind of weird out there. So just so you know, at this time, it's September 1st. At the time and during COVID, you couldn't evict for non-payment issues, right? But you could evict if they were a danger to your building. So one day, my 3rd water bill comes in and it's substantially higher than what it should be, which tells me there's a leak, right? So I'm just like, I have to handle this. I get a plumber over there. We're looking at the building and he's like, hey, the leak's coming from the tenant that I'm having issues with apartment. And so I knock on their door, and of course they're not letting me in. Every time I've ever knocked on their door, they're like, hey, we have COVID. Like, you're not coming in here. They've had COVID 15 times. And like, if you keep knocking on the door, we're going to call the police. So I'm like, all right. So I ended up calling the police, and the police come. I tell them what's going on. There's an emergency in the building. They're like, look. So the tenants are like, hey, we'll let the plumber in and only the plumber. And I'm like, that's fine. I just want this fixed. The plumber fixes it and I leave. And about 8 hours later of having a standoff with my tenants, and I get a call from a neighbor, and they're like, hey, the ambulance is at your apartment.
they're like, your tenant's mom OD'd in the apartment. And right then I realized that they weren't letting, and she's like, her arms are blue. She's been passed out for a while. And I'm like, well, the reason why they weren't letting us in is because they had someone that was overdosed in the apartment the whole time. Well, the plumber was in there. So that was, and when I get to the eviction is that was my key where I'm like, okay, sweet. And then it had nothing to do with the overdose. It had everything to do with that there was a leak in the apartment and they were not reporting it, nor were they letting me in. They were a cause of potential damage to my building. I could evict them, they were causing harm. So I get with my lawyer and we end up going through the eviction process, and they were smart because they kept extending the eviction court date. They knew what they were doing. And then the date where the judge was going to rule them get evicted, she raises her hand. She's like, I'll be out in 2 weeks, And so they made an agreement that if she's out in 2 weeks, that this will just get thrown out the window. So these tenants, they managed to, they're just wild, they're just wild. But they also, they were smart enough. They stayed until the last possible moment without getting an eviction. And I give them credit a little bit. They were as calculated as I've ever seen. They were very calculated.
I know. Should use that for good.
Yeah.
So you're about 10 months after closing. What's the status of the 4 units now? And have you slept there one night after the car got stolen? Be honest.
Yes, I have. Yeah, so they're out. Once they left, I went in there and, there was about a foot of trash in the building, which is not, it's not Mark, you've taken over a lot of distressed buildings. This was a distressed unit within a building. You had about a foot of trash, hundreds of thousands of cockroaches. So I got everybody out of the building. My first step was get an exterminator in there. So I got it exterminated. I had to, I spent a whole day just cleaning the building, taking the shop back, cleaning all the spider webs, sweeping up all these dead cockroaches. They're coming over, the exterminator's coming over for round 2. And my renovation is scheduled to start in 2 weeks.
So the whole place is empty now?
I got one tenant living there. She's been there for over 5 years. She pays a week early. She's agreed to stay through the renovation. I made arrangements with her in case the renovation doesn't go perfectly. I decided to keep her in there. 3 out of the 4 units are empty.
So we're going to have you back with a second part of this. Tom, go on. What questions you got? I know you got something.
Man, there's just so much there. First off, Joey, you are stronger than the obstacles ahead of you, right?
Yes.
Take that as a silver lining. Like you went through a battle here, and it gets easier. So yeah. I guess just talk through, like, this would scare a lot of people off, right? Any one of these little things you mentioned would probably be like, F this, I'm out, I'm running away. Are you still looking to buy? And honestly, or are you on the sidelines for a little bit?
Yeah, no, I am, because it's lucrative. I mean, real estate, like when done right, is one of the most lucrative things I've ever seen. Right now, my focus is getting the building up to, getting the thing to where it's stable. I will say stable. Getting renters in there, get some cash flow going. Yeah, I'm ready to go. I mean, it sucked, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I feel like I have a PhD in property management. Relationship management. It networked me with a lot more people than I thought it would. For example, when you're on the south side of Chicago, you hear about, the neighborhoods block to block. Well, I met all my neighbors as a result. All my neighbors are now part of my screening process for future tenants. I have 3 neighbors that are raising their hand. They're like, hey, put the applications in front of me. I'll let you know if this person is good or bad, if we know them. Mike Baker, for example, he also introduced me to an excellent plumber in the area that is now, that can do work at an affordable price. he actually introduced me to an to a Chicago police officer that on the side, he issues eviction notices. So you don't have to do it personally because it can get kind of dangerous. So yeah, I mean, I learned a lot.
That's awesome, man. So there's so many, like, what would you do differently? But like, let's just pick one thing out of this whole story where it's like, hey, that would have made this a smoother process.
I would have gotten everybody out of the building before I bought it.
Yep.
Number one, don't. And it's that's it.
Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about the risk, especially this last year, of taking on tenants and what truly the risk value is of that. It's good advice.
Two quick comments there. Like, I put a premium on vacant buildings, like we're talking about. And two, like, in your attorney review, just be buttoned up. Right. Go ahead and ask for the world, because I'm doing it right now. I'm selling a 6 unit. They're asking me a million questions and I'm like, well, good. They should be. Right. Like, they should be asking me all these questions. Here's all the documentation. It's clean. But like, they're doing a good job on the buy side to cover their butts from 500 different angles.
Yeah. And, when you're buying in, Bridgeport, Fuller Park area, Canaryville, McKinley Park, a lot of these people and families, they have families close by. They've been there for literally 3 or 4 generations. And I think in life, like, it's a small world. So even these tenants, I always treated them fairly. And to me, I always tried to do the right thing. And a part of that is to make sure that if I have their respect, they're not going to throw a rock through my building once they moved out. And as a landlord, you guys can tell better than I can. Even if they're not paying, you still actually have an obligation to take care of the buildings and make sure that their unit's inhabitable. You can't turn off the utilities. You can't force them out. If they say, hey, something's broken, you still have to fix it. And if you don't, they could call the police on you. They could sue you, so that was a difficult part, is when you're dealing with an eviction situation, when they're like, hey, can you come fix the electricity? The electricity went out. Well, it forced me to get to know the neighbors that, came with me to do that, to make sure everything was safe. Yep.
All right, cool. Well, we got a lot here that we took from today. So let's wrap this up here. So I'm going to rephrase this first question a little. What's your competitive advantage based on what you've gone through with this particular property so far? How is this going to shape the rest of your real estate investment career?
Yeah. So one thing that I've realized, I know the cost of what an eviction is. When you're dealing with multi-units in Chicago, you're not only losing the rent from that unit, you're losing the rent from others affected by it, assuming that they want to move out. My competitive edge is I've learned that if I might have a niche for taking over buildings with eviction situations in there, and I know the costs affiliated with them. So maybe in the future, I'm actually specialized, and that's where I find my deals, is taking over problem properties. They don't scare me as much.
That's awesome.
My property, like the comps in the area, the lowest is 485. I bought my building at 275. So even with the loss of everything I've done, I'm still going. But you also pay for your problems. And, I did.
A lot of soft costs in there that we talked about here today.
So what's one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
You hear the take action part of it, but take action. Start walking through buildings. Network, go to your areas. But I would say for someone that hasn't bought a building yet, start walking properties.
All right. What do you do for fun?
Yeah, for fun, this property's really consumed my life for the last year, so haven't had that. For fun, I like to exercise. I like to hang out with friends. I'm your average 27-year-old. I like going to the bar with some buddies. I like taking my dog for a walk. I played volleyball in college, so I like playing beach volleyball on Tuesday nights.
If it was my friends at a building and their car got stolen, they would totally think it was me, just because that would be a joke I would play on them.
Yeah.
We've done that. If someone's been too drunk to drive and there's a sober person there, we'll move the car in the morning.
Yep.
Just to mess with them.
We do that to people here in the office. We move the car to the next parking lot.
So, all right, Joe, what's a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you would recommend to our listeners?
All the Bigger Pocket stuff is really good. I really liked Vivid Vision. I don't know if either of you guys read it. I have a whiteboard in my apartment, and I wrote my vivid vision out. I also drew a picture of it, which is kind of weird, but I started off with a bridge, and at one side of the bridge is this 4-unit building. And then on the other side of that bridge is, my long-term goals. And, what does building that bridge look like to get to that long-term goal? And, Vivid Vision kind of inspired me to do that.
Awesome.
Yep.
Nice. Besides yourself, name one person in your local network you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
Mike Baker.
I saw that coming.
Yeah. I mean, Mike Baker, and also having friends around your age that do it, like getting out. I met my good friend Connor and Jay on Bigger Pockets. They're kind of around the same stage as I am. So having that kind of support. And let's be honest, when you're in real estate, your significant other doesn't always want to talk about it. Your friends don't always want to hear about it. So getting friends that enjoy just casually talking about real estate's beneficial.
I love it.
Yep.
All right, Joe, thanks so much. This has provided a ton of value, a ton of entertainment. How can our listeners learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
Yeah. So you could find me on Instagram at 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗁𝗃. In terms of adding value to others, anybody, if you reach out to me on there, I'm happy to give you any advice on the 203K process, buying your first property, having phone calls on property management, connecting you with someone that can be a resource if I'm not it. So definitely my Instagram is going to be the best way to reach me.
Awesome. We will link to all that in the show notes.
Yep.
All right. So Mark, I'll give you multiple choice again on this one. We mentioned we have a carjacking in this episode. So in preparation for that, I looked up. There were this many stolen cars and carjackings in Chicago in 2020. Is the answer A, 1,150, B, 3,421, C, 9,599, or D, 14,581?
Oh, man.
I had no idea on this one. Like, I didn't have any idea of magnitude.
I would have said B, because that just seemed that, I imagine a lot of them don't even get reported even too. So B.
So you're on the 3,400 number.
Yeah.
Joey, what do you want to go with?
Well, I'll tell you this. After that happened, I found an interesting fact that recently in Chicago that they made carjackings. You can't hold somebody on bond for a carjacking. So one of the reasons why they went up is because you can go steal an $80,000 car, get caught, get out of jail that day, not have to, the car's gone and you just made a huge profit. So a lot, whatever the big number is, 14,000, I'm going.
Man, I did not know that. You got to split the middle there, guys. It's C, the 9,599.
Gosh, that's crazy.
That's a lot of carjacking.
That's a huge number per capita. Like, wow, that's crazy. All right. You leave me in astonishment going out with that. So, Joey, awesome show. Tom, thanks as always. We spoke about it today here, the house hacking calculator on straightupchicagoinvestor.com. Go ahead and download it. It's an awesome tool. We also have links to other calculators on there. We have the rent versus sell. So if you're contemplating, should I sell a property I have, or should I flip it, or should I hold it? It's an awesome calculator that runs out your 5, 10, 15-year outlook on what you'd make, keep it as a rental versus what you might make flipping it. So check that out. Don't forget to leave us a review. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Joey.
Yep. Have a good one.
Thanks, all.